Pitchers and catchers report in just a few days, but the Reds opening day roster is already pretty much full. We'll tell you why on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Stephen Offenbaker. That guy over there, he is Jeff Carr. We are lifelong Cincinnati Reds fans who have been podcasting about these Reds for a combined 14 years. On today's show, the Reds have a number of non-roster players heading out to camp in Goodyear. We're going to power rank them. Power rank. Yeah. Okay. Maybe later on today's show, we're going to get to that. In a few minutes, we'll look at the players that need to prove something this spring in order to have some playing time in the regular season. And we're going to start with why the roster is pretty much full and set on today's episode that is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Jeff, where we said we're going to start is basically it is not very hard to look at the group of players that the Reds have collected this offseason and say, this is going to be the opening day roster. There is very little opportunity at this point for somebody else to come in or for somebody else to really make this team from the minor leagues.
Yeah, we mentioned on our most recent episode talking about the bullpen and how there's really only two spots to earn there. That's the only spot on the roster that has any openings. Like when you look at the fact that the Reds are going to carry 13 pitchers, and that's the limit. You can't carry any more than that, but there's not been a team that I have heard reported of that carries less than 13 pitchers. So you're going to have 13 position players. All those spots, at least on the position side of the bench, are full. Now the question is, what positions do those guys play? And we of course have plenty of coverage that'll be coming up later on throughout spring training, looking at all of that. But as far as the 13 seats on the bench, those are pretty much full. Assuming health, I don't see any way that these guys are off the roster. You start at catcher, you got Trevino, and you have Tyler Stevenson. You go into the infield. I won't say specific positions just yet because there's a lot of things that need to be figured out there. But you look on the infield, you've got Elly De La Cruz, Matt McLain, Gavin Lux. I'm counting Spencer Steers an infielder on this one. I think he's going to play infield mostly. Jeimer Candelario, and I'm also counting Christian Encarnacion-Strand. Then you go into the outfield, and you've got Austin Hayes, TJ Friedl, you've got Freychild, Jake Fraley, and Stuart Fairchild. That's your 13. That's it. We're done. If everybody's healthy, that's your opening day position 13 of the 26-man roster.
You left off a name, and I'm wondering where you're going to fit in Santiago Espinal.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
There's another guy there.
I may not have counted 13, but yeah, if I did,
I think I was going along with you. I think I got 12, and I think that Santiago Espinal is in fact the 13th guy that's going to be on this roster. But and there's really nobody that's going to take a spot from any of those dudes. Those dudes are on this team if they are healthy. So you're right. There it is. Now, the position where they're going to play conversation, well, those are going to be fun. And we're definitely going to get into those just before camp starts, and then all throughout camp we're going to cover a lot of the positional locations. One of the things that I look at when I see this is, is this a better team than we saw last year? Because that's really the question that everybody's asking themselves, right? And I think that it is, Jeff. I think when you look at that roster and you look at some of the flexibility that's built in, some of the upgrades, when you know what certain players are going to be asked to do, the utility of Gavin Lux, I think, is the better than the utility that Jonathan India would have been.
Yes.
Healthy Matt McLain back on this roster automatically makes this team better. If CES is healthy, and we're being told that he is, so until he proves that he's not, we're going to have to roll with the fact that they're saying that he's going to be ready to go. He makes this team better.
Just based on that, like Matt McLain and CES last year, you put those two guys together, you got -1 WAR. Those two guys are going to be better than that this year. And I think that when you look at that and you extrapolate out like how Elly De La Cruz is going to progress, I think Spencer Steer has a much better season, especially from a rate stat standpoint. And I think Jeimer Candelario has been marked by a bunch of people as a bounce back candidate. This team is going to bounce back from the guys that it retains, but it's also going to improve by the guys that it adds. Like you mentioned, Gavin Lux. I think Austin Hayes is going to be a solid left fielder for them all season long. And Jose Trevino is much better than Luke Maile in my book. So I think that even just with those additions, they're slightly better. And health makes them even more better. I mean, I just feel like the thing with me,
the impact that it has on guys like Stuart Fairchild, where Tito is now going to be able to use him in a way, because I think he's going to be on this team, but Tito will be able to use him strictly against left-handed pitching, which is something that couldn't be done last year, and it exposed him and all of his faults. But only playing against lefties, Fairchild's very, very serviceable out there, and that's going to make this team better as well. It becomes, I talked about this a week or so ago, right? That the one signing of Austin Hayes created a domino effect, and the one addition of a healthy Matt McLain creates a domino effect. The addition of Gavin Lux creates another domino effect, and now you're kind of getting into a position where it's very measurable improvements that are going to be able to be made just from having players in their right places and putting them in positions to be successful.
And it's things like that that just make me wonder about all these projection systems that continually say, and I know that Fangraphs came out and said that they're going along the lines of Pacoda and saying that the Reds are going to finish last in the Central and all of the algorithms and calculations and things like that they do. I don't buy into that for a minute, because I think that every aspect of this team has at least maintained, if not gotten slightly better. I hold to the fact that I don't think they've gotten exponentially better. And I think that is the reason that a lot of people tend to focus on the analytical side of this team not getting so much better. And that's why you're seeing projection systems not like it. But you've got other guys who cover the game, Buster Olney. You've got plenty of guys at Major League Baseball. You've got Ben Verlander. There's so many different people that are looking at the Reds and are very intrigued by them. And it's not because they got a bunch of quirky weirdos that are just going to be wild and wacky and you have no idea what they're going to do. It's because they're better. And I feel like that is why I'm sort of excited with the fact that the roster is set. And honestly, Steve, like the biggest question about the 13 would be CES. And I honestly feel like he's healthy and ready to go. We've heard a lot of reports that he is. He played in the Arizona Fall League with no setbacks, anything like that. So that's kind of where the biggest, like, if healthy question mark is, because what does he look like in spring training? But we'll get into that here in a little bit. But I still think that everybody that I listed out, if healthy, is on the opening day roster.
Yeah, I think that is a very reasonable assessment, Jeff. I think that I would push back just a little bit on that CES injury thing. I think I have equal concerns for CES and Matt McLain just in how they will respond coming back to full-time playing, right? Like there could be some issues there just as they kind of work their way back into a full load of Major League Baseball. But beyond that, I agree with everything you just said. Looking at this roster, I'm pretty excited. I saw, I mean, you probably saw, I tweeted out yesterday that I got my opening day ticket. So like, I'm ready for tomorrow. Yeah. Let's just have baseball tomorrow.
Got my opening day ticket as well. I'm so excited. But yes, you mentioned Matt McLain and CES and the health and things like that. The Reds do have a few players that have to prove something, and it all has one common thread. We'll tell you what that is coming up next.
You can take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball game tickets with Gametime. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. I know baseball season is right around the corner, and there's some other stuff you can use Gametime for right now. Want to go check out a concert? They've got tickets for you. Looking to go to the Super Bowl? I just checked. Plenty of seats still available with Gametime. Again, just download that Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. If you're going to a venue that you don't know, Gametime has you covered with a view from your seat. And with all-in pricing, you're going to know exactly what you'll pay for that seat before you ever reach the checkout process. Again, just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time.
We're talking about the Cincinnati Reds here today, all day, every week, every month, all year long. Make sure you subscribe to get at least 30 minutes of Red Stock in your feed every single day. And actually, we have been in the off-season schedule here over the last 7-8 weeks, whatever it's been. Time is a construct. But coming up next week, we are back in in-season mode. 5 days a week, we will be with you Monday through Friday, taking you through spring training as the Reds pitchers and catchers report on Monday. We'll also be back on more of a morning schedule. I know that during the offseason, we've been more of an afternoon, drive home from work type podcast. We're going to be back in your feeds in the mornings starting next week. All right, Steve. So we mentioned it. CES, Matt McLain kind of have to prove that they're healthy. I would almost say that there's the health that I'm the most worried about. It. TJ Friedl does have some soft tissue things, which makes his a bit of a different question of health. But based on what caused Matt McLain's injury and what caused CES's injury, those are things they're going to do. I mean, Matt McLain's still going to slide, and CES is still probably going to get hit by a pitch. And he might get hit by a pitch on the same hand that he got hit by a pitch, and it destroyed his entire wrist. So that's kind of, for me, the big question surrounding them as we watch them in spring training. What does their performance look like? And what happens when they do those things? You remember, like, back a couple of years ago, whenever Nick Senzel made a diving catch, we all gasped and made sure that he stood up afterward. That's kind of where I'm going to be with Matt McLain taking a dive or CES getting hit by a pitch.
Well, and honestly, if we're being fair, that's how I feel when TJ Friedl lays out for
100%,
because he plays at 110%, and I get it, but also, could you not break yourself? And then I think in this conversation also, there is still some question about how Stuart Fairchild's thumb is going to respond and how he's going to be able to play. The Reds haven't really said anything questioning whether or not they thought he would be back, but it was a very weird thumb injury that he had. And
I was going to say, I just got a twinge in my thumb thinking about it.
It's on the list of, I need to see Stuart Fairchild and that he's okay before I'm just like, we can count on Fairchild. I don't know that. Need to see how he comes back from the injury.
Because it was that weird term, the whole subluxation.
Yeah, it was. It was, his thumb basically collapsed on itself. That's a way to, it's
weird word.
Yeah.
But
so
I think
those are the four though, right? Like if we're looking at it, when, if it was the, dramatic made for television stuff, you would be like, when last we saw these guys, right? And it's like, those are the four guys that really have some injury questions to answer. More so than anybody else.
Meanwhile, back in the training room. When it comes to spring training, I think that's the biggest thing for me is just watching how they respond to in-game stuff. There's going to be people, and it may be you, that go crazy about, well, he only had one hit in 5 at-bats yesterday, or he only got one at-bat and they pulled him. What's wrong with him? Something's wrong with him. It's going to be how they physically respond to what they're doing. Does CES get a big time hit, get like an extra base hit or something, and then get to first base and kind of shake his wrist a little bit? Does TJ Friedl leg out a double or get a steal and take a minute to get up? Things like that are going to be the kind of stuff that I really focus in on, not necessarily the day-to-day stuff, because another PSA, by the way, before spring training starts, spring training stats don't matter. Just wanted to let you know that, because that's the truth. Amir Garrett, Neftali Soto, lots of people would like to corroborate that point. But health is going to be the common thread with everything. And quite frankly, if we could just get some kind of guarantee that we're going to make it all the way through spring training with a healthy pitching staff, then I'm going to be just absolutely floored, because it feels like basically David Bell's tenure, they entered opening day with at least one starting pitcher on the injured list.
Outside of proving health, let me ask it to you like this. Outside of proving health, who has something to prove? And what is it that they have to prove? For me, guys like Jeimer Candelario come to mind. I need him to prove that he can hit the ball before May. If you recall, I saw him in Texas in April and was ready to run him out of town, and then he kind of started hitting the ball for a while. But I need this team to not do that thing that it does where they just make us crazy in March and April and crown the Pittsburgh Pirates the world April champions of baseball. Like I need the Reds to start hot. I need people to hit. And Jamer is a guy who has consistently not hit at the beginning of the season.
Well, and to your point, a $189 batting average, 378 slugging percentage the first month of the season for Jeimer Candelario last year. Yeah, it's got to be better than that, obviously. But also, I think I kind of want to piggyback off this. And it's a guy that we've talked about that I don't necessarily know that he can earn his way onto the opening day roster with his performance. But I just need to see Noelvi Marte not look overmatched, because that's what he was all year last year. Overmatched. There was not a point where I felt like, man, he's really starting to turn a corner. Even if he had a good game, it kind of felt like, well, yeah, you're going to run into him eventually. That's why you're a professional hitter. That's what professional hitters do. They run into a hit every so often. But even after the season ended in the Arizona Fall League, and then when he went down to the Dominican for the Winter League, he still wasn't hitting. So what's he do in spring training? Again, I want to reiterate, I don't think he can earn his way onto the opening day roster, but he can certainly play his way out of any plans whatsoever during spring training if he just looks like he can't hit the broadside of the barn when anybody's pitching.
Yeah, negative 1.8 in WAR.
He's almost a bona fide starter, but the opposite.
Like the other way, right?
Starter. Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely got a lot to prove. I really hope the Reds pull him aside early and are like, listen, you're going to Louisville and
some work.
What you do. So here's your information. You're going to Louisville. What you do now after I've told you that determines if or ever you returning to Major League Baseball. So go work. I hope they do that.
Yeah.
I think that's the fairest they could be with him. To not set some expectation. If you go out against these minor league pitchers and hit 300, well, you're still our starting third baseman, because he's not going to be the starting third. It's not going to happen.
No, and the Reds would be foolish to even consider something like that, let alone tell him that he would be the opening day third baseman. But yeah, and I don't think that it's necessarily ever been about the effort. But how does he respond to that? Remember, the Reds challenged Hunter Green by not making him the de facto opening day starter last year. He responded by getting a lot of Cy Young votes and becoming the finishing eighth in Cy Young voting because he was that good. He actually led the National League in WAR, according to Baseball Reference. That's how you respond. What does Noelvi Marte do now? Like, I'm with you. Tell him the deal out of the gate. And let's see how he works, because if he doesn't work hard, knowing his fate for the beginning of the season, then they should not worry about the rest of the season for Noelvi Marte.
Absolutely.
And based on that, because he's on this list, there's plenty of non-roster players that the Reds are bringing to camp. We're going to tell you who we are buying into, if any, coming up next. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 100 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game, where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw one passing yard to win. So you add that pick to your total Prize Picks, and you're going to get that dub. Pair that with a couple of more picks, and you get into the money. And it's so easy to get your withdrawals and you get your payment from Prize Picks. You get that money quickly. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
If you can't watch us on YouTube, make sure you take us on the road with you. We are on every single audio platform out there with the podcast. Take us in the car, take us to the gym, take us on a walk down by the river. We just want to talk Reds baseball with you. We don't care where. And as a side note, Jeff, just as a commentary, I hope that Patrick Mahomes does not have one single yard of passing. Do you want to know the joy, the absolute utter joy it would bring to me if Mahomes has not a single yard, which means that Kelsey has not a single catch? You know how happy that would make me?
I think they'd still show Taylor Swift on the screen 5 or 6 times, even if he didn't have a catch.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's get to these non-roster invitees, because, you know, I will share that in show prep, you put through this up there and I chuckled. I'm like, do we even care about the non-roster invitees? Because there's really not any needle movers in there, save for one guy.
I would say from an opening day standpoint, no, but there are some guys that we will see along the way as 2025 goes along. But from an opening day standpoint, I want to throw this up here because this is for those watching on YouTube. We'll read it out loud for the audio folks. But for those watching on YouTube, we got this list off of Twitter. Shout out to Bryce Spalding for putting this list together. He's a great follow for Reds content as well there on Twitter. But he put these all together. We've got a lot of pitchers and only a couple of position players. You've got Ian Gibaut and Wade Miley, who were just added to the Reds list a couple of days ago. You also have, not on this list, but a guy that Albert Abreu, I do see him now on the list, literally was just added to the team. You also have Brian Shaw, who I do think has a really good shot at the bullpen. You got some young guys in Zach Maxwell and Luis May, and we'll see them a lot this spring training. Yasver Zulueta, Connor Phillips, Julian Aguiar, and Brandon Williamson are on the list, but they are not going to play this year because they had Tommy John surgery. The position side of things, you've got 3 catchers, Will Banfield, Michael Troutwine, and Austin Wins. We remember him. Wins, the double machine. Infielders, Edwin Arroyo, Cam Collier, Yvonne Johnson, Sal Stewart, are all on the list. I'm excited to see Sal in big league camp. I don't think he has a shot at making the major league roster this year, but it's going to be cool to see him in the big league camp. And then on the outfield, you have Hector Rodriguez, Blake Dunn, Reese Hines, Jacob Hurtubise, Will Benson, and Cooper Bowman. Outside of Bowman and Rodriguez, those are all pretty familiar faces there. But yeah, and Tyler Callahan on the outfield as well. But yes, Steve, the only guy that really anybody should pay attention to on this list is Rhett Lauder.
Right. And for me, Rhett Lauder, I don't think Rhett Lauder is really, I can't see it. I see him as being the next man up. I see him starting the season in AAA, being ready to pop up at a moment's notice, and the Reds knowing that he can handle himself if they need to use him. Throw that list back up. I want to distill it down just a little bit, because looking at the pitching here of non-roster invitees, there's 3 names to pay attention to. That's Ian Gibaut, that's Alex Young, that's Brian Shaw. Those are the 3 guys that could play their way into that final bullpen spot. As we talked about last week or earlier this week, Jeff, we think there's one spot up for grabs in the bullpen right now, and the rest is settled. So on the non-roster side, those are the 3 guys that are going to compete for that spot. Everybody else will start out either not with the team or in the minor leagues as insurance. Looking at the 40-man leftovers there, Jeff, you really don't have anybody that I think is going to compete to steal a spot, save for one guy on all of the 40-man leftover list. I go almost all the way down the list to Reese Hines. If he could have a tremendous spring, I think he could push Stuart Fairchild to be that righty part of Fairchild to pair with Jake Fraley. But I think odds are he starts the season in AAA as well, and they go with Fairchild if he's healthy.
I would say I think there's a little bit of interest in Yasver Zulueta, but even still, I think he's kind of on the Dowry Moretta side of things. If you remember, Dowry Moretta was always one of those guys that had a ton of stuff and a ton of potential, but he got few opportunities, and the few opportunities he got killed. And that's kind of how Zulueta feels. There's a lot of peripherals that point to him being a very interesting relief pitcher in the future. but I just don't know where the opportunity is for him. I don't see him beating out any of the veteran non-roster invite guys in Jabot, Young, or Brian Shaw. So I'd be interested to see what his opportunities really are. We'll see him a lot in spring training, and I think we'll see him at some point. He'll be on the roster wheel for 2025, but I don't think we see him. I don't even know that we see him in the first month of the season, let alone opening day. So that's been a name. I've seen Zulueta thrown around a lot this offseason of some folks really, I think maybe just trying to tie themselves into baseball mental pretzels and trying to, squint really hard, turn the lights down low, turn the head sideways, and figure out if he could be in the major league bullpen. I just don't see it.
Yeah, let's do a little fun exercise here, Jeff. If you have to pick one person off that list as this guy will be on the opening day roster pick, of all these names, who's your pick?
Brian Shaw.
Okay, I take Ian Jabot. I think Jabot will beat out. I think Jabot will beat him out.
He's definitely, he's proved it in the past. So Shaw, and Shaw's done it. It's been a few more years since he's done it. But I did find it interesting. I was kind of looking back at the first years in Cleveland for Terry Francona. And his first season, 2013, Brian Shaw was on that team. So he is kind of a constant for Terry Francona, where it's like first year, new ball club, Brian Shaw on the roster. I think unless he just shows that he ain't got it, I think he makes the opening day roster. I think that Ian Jabot, though, accepts a appointment to AAA because I bet that they tell him, like, look, dude, you're going to be one of our first guys up, and then you might be able to earn a stay there whenever you get called up. And I think that he's one of those guys that accepts that because he knows this organization and he knows that they know him.
I think that's fair. But I also, I just feel like I wanna buy into your logic with Francona there, but Terry is coming here to win,
right?
And if Ian pitches better than Brian, I think it's a conversation with Brian Shaw that goes something like, "Listen, I love you, dude, but I am taking the best 26 guys, and right now, Ian Jabot is one of the best 26 guys."
And
I think that's the conversation.
And to piggyback off of that, another PSA about spring training performances, the pitching side of things, the way that you can evaluate that is what the pitcher can control. Is he giving up homers? Is he giving up walks? And is he getting strikeouts? And is he keeping the ball on the ground? Because, by the time Brian Shaw or Ian Jabot get into a ball game, there's a good chance that the Reds have already cycled in some of their backup infielders, some of the reserve outfielders, and a ball put in play may not necessarily be fielded correctly. So don't go too crazy over things like ERA when it comes to spring training pitching performances. Look more at what they can control.
Let me ask you this on that. I've often wondered, and I don't know why you wouldn't do it this way, but it just seems like it would be a fun exercise. In spring training, most of the time you have a pretty good idea of what your starting rotation looks like. Mm-hmm. And they don't base the starting rotation as much on on-field performance versus, how they recover, how they rebound, how they look, what's their control, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Why not use the relief pitchers in the front half of the game when the major league hitters are out there? Why not? And then bring the starter in the fourth or the fifth inning to get their pitches in and stretch them out, because that's really all you're trying to do is get them stretched out.
I feel like I remember seeing that not routinely, but I feel like I remember seeing other teams doing this, but it's not to the middle part of spring training. I think once they figured out who their rotation is, then they sort of cycle the relief pitchers first who are battling for stuff. That's a good point, though. Especially guys like Jabot and Shaw and Young and Zulueta and even Luis May and Zach Maxwell would benefit more from the higher.
Because we know Hunter Green's going to make this rotation. So on the days that he's scheduled to pitch in Goodyear, bring him in the fourth or the fifth inning and let the relievers pitch the front half against the good hitters. You see what I'm saying?
And then we could have the really fun conversation if he finishes the game and the Reds have the lead, that he gets a spring training save.
Spring training save. The leader in Cactus League saves is
You
Hunter.
want to talk about a statistic that does not mean anything at all. Wow. Yeah, that would be it. Anyway, that's a great spot to end today's show. Thanks everybody so much for checking out today's Locked On Reds podcast, and thanks for hanging with us all throughout the offseason. We are going into in-season mode, though, starting next week. Pitchers and catchers reporting on Monday. We're going to be right there with you, talking about the Reds, looking at the starting pitching staff and ranking that starting pitching staff. I have a pretty good feeling who I know the 5 are. I've actually written about this at CincinnatiRedsTalk.com as well, if you want to go get a preview for what we're going to talk about on Monday. But we'll be talking about starting pitcher power rankings coming up on Monday. But until then, you can connect with us on social media. You can follow Steve at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs on Twitter. You can follow me at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs on Twitter, on TikTok, and on Instagram as well. And we also have a Facebook page. The Locked On Reds Facebook page is a great community of Reds fans talking about Reds baseball all the time. Until then, though, Steve, what can people expect from you and me?
We're going to be all over spring training, all over the news, all over the in-game action, even though the stats don't matter. We're going to bring it all back here to keep you locked on Reds every single day. I can tell you this, neither one of you or I are anywhere near the best shapes of our lives.
I don't even know when that was. If you never were in the best shape of your life, when are you in the best shape of your life?
Our shape is round.